talking about the flow. We're talking about the flow, and then what is the relationship to the awareness and the flow, to pure awareness and the flow, and also what's the relationship to intellectual, rational, and the flow? Is awareness the flow? And
Yeah, yes. Full spectrum awareness. When you're in that eternal moment, which is kind of an oxymoron, but the eternal moment of full spectrum awareness, you're in the flow. I see the two as different ways of naming the same thing.
and the flow isn't what, what is intellectual, like what is intellectualism
Well,
and
that's
rational?
all. Yeah, that's all based on experience-based thinking, the thinking that comes from accumulated experiences, and you can't be in the flow because then you're operating from the fruit of the tree of knowledge. You're allowing on your ego-based knowledge and your ego-based actions and explanations. So again, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that it's limited. It'll take you so far.
So again, the ego's magnificence and its accomplishments. So I remember, yes, you're telling me about the how if you are doing or okay, so we're talking about kumbaya. So people think, okay, by coming together and singing kumbaya songs, then this is going to bring people together. Black people, white people singing kumbaya, together, and like, but this is still ego oriented emotionalism, sentimentalism. But also, though, people to live in that world, if you can learn to function in that world and become proficient in that and learn the interpersonal reality well, then that can help to strengthen you so that you can go beyond it. Or because if you never go into that and you, I don't
Yeah,
know.
right. See, that goes back to that delineation I gave of the hierarchy of growing up. See, when you grow up to the point where you begin to see people, identify people as your superiors, your inferiors, and your equals, and you keep including more and more people into that realm of equals, then that's still an intellectual or ego based attempt to conclude that we're all equals. But doing that is preparing you for the possibility of going beyond that. Until you do that, see if you're still back below superior, inferior, equal, when you just think in terms of superior and inferior, top dogs and underdogs, insiders and outsiders, right guys and wrong guys, good guys and bad guys. See, when you're in that, you're not prepared to go beyond the ego. So you need to upgrade your software to the next level, which is superior, inferior, and equals, and that then prepares you to become strong enough to upgrade to the next level.
So that's what they're doing with their kumbaya songs. They're saying, okay, we're all equal, and
Yeah,
um,
that's all good. Can't we all, like, what's his name said, can't we all just get along?
Rodney King or
Yeah,
whatever.
Rodney King. Can't we all just get along? See, he's right. That's an upgrade from being top dogs and underdogs, winners and losers.
But getting along is still ego, superior, inferior, equal.
Yeah, it's still,
Still
and
interpersonal.
yeah, and still intellectually oriented, ego driven.
So the
It's still separate. It's still trying to deal with separation by making us equal. See, we are not equal, and we are not superior. We are not inferior. We are mutual participants in something larger. But the ego can only see, at that level, can only see superiors, inferiors, and equals.
so okay.
That's still dualistic thinking.
So it's wrong to say all men are equal.
Well, it's not wrong. It's it still keeps you stuck in separation thinking, in dualistic thinking.
Because thinking all men are equal, you're still within that dualistic framework of superior, inferior, and equals.
Yeah. And see, if you're saying we're equals, that means that we're separate, but we're equal. We're still separate, but we're separate equals.
So, so there is something beyond that,
Yes.
and what is that?
That's what I call in my hierarchy of upgrading your software, we become mutual participants. See, a husband and wife, a mother and father can see themselves as equals, or they can see themselves and function thereby as mutual participants in something larger than themselves.
So they're still focused on what are we? Are we superior, inferior, equals? Can we get along? This is interpersonal, right?
Yeah.
And this is trying to make things happen through the interpersonal framework. Okay, but then you can move beyond that, and that dissolves your concern and your preoccupation with who's superior, inferior, equal, and you're saying maybe that then you go to the to mutual participants. Then what? Then you're focused on the goal, or what is going on here?
Well, you're focused on the project. You're mutual participants in a project larger than the ego, larger than yourself. See, for example, a husband and a wife, or a mother and a father, wouldn't get involved in, well, this is a woman's work and this is a man's work and this is what you should do. They just, they see what needs to be done, and whoever, they just do it. It's like it's like when you're walking in a crowded space. Say you're going into uh, New York Penn Station, and the crowds are overwhelming. If you get involved in superior, inferior, equal thinking, you're trying to dodge and trying to work your way through. But if you're participating in something larger, you just sort of move, and people automatically just step aside from one another, and you just work your way through, and you don't think about who's in whose way and who has to get out of whose way. It's like, I remember one time I was jogging back in the days when I could jog, and this woman was coming toward me. She said, "You need to move to the right side." Rather than just naturally enjoying the atmosphere and the walk, she was concerned about who was on which side and what was the right way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then back to the husband and wife, or the mother and father, they don't get involved in who should be doing what. They just do what needs to be done, and they just respond to that out of their mutual participation in the project.
Is there anything beyond this mutual participating in the project?
Well, then that prepares you to begin to see yourself not just as in local projects, but mutual participants in much larger, increasingly larger, including global projects.
So they seem so similar. What's the difference between mutual participants in global and mutual participants in local? It's the same consciousness, right?
Yeah, it's the same consciousness. It's just a much broader spectrum of awareness.
And the idea is you want to expand your spectrum of awareness.
Right. So you become aware that you are participants not only in local things, but you begin to realize that, as Bucky Fuller said, we're all astronauts on board a spaceship.
What was that thing that you would say? Any of thoughts of that?
No.
Okay, we're all astronauts on board a spaceship. So what is that consciousness?
Well, that's mutual participants in global projects.
So what was that thing that you would say that Bucky Fuller would say, like it was atropic, or no?
Oh, we are instruments of an anti-entropic reordering function, working in dynamic counterbalance to our expanding universe of entropically increasing random disorderliness.
What does that mean?
We are instruments of an anti-entropic reordering function. In other words, we are instruments of bringing things together in synergistic creative combinations that's working in counterbalance to the natural dissipating process of energy events. See, the natural process is entropy, things falling apart and becoming more disorganized. but we are instruments of bringing more order into the world, so that there's a natural process of entropy, but there's also, in the midst of all entropic processes, there's a synergetic process of of what some people are now calling complexification, that the whole universe is engaged in a process of complexification, things becoming more complex, more orderly, and more synergistic.
Hmm.
Like when a star explodes, it looks like it's only an entropic process, but synergy is occurring because new molecular and atomic um, particles are being created. So in the visible process of entropy, there's an invisible process of synergy occurring.
In the visible entropy, there's an invisible synergy.
Yeah.
And what is the meaning of all this? So what does it come to down to in the end?
Well, that's what Bucky was saying. We are instruments of this complexification, this synergistic process that's occurring throughout the universe.
So would Bucky say then that this is leading toward heaven, or what is it leading
Yes.
toward?
Yeah.
Um, and does anybody know what that would look like, or
No. See, does an atom inside your body know what you look like? See, your atom doesn't have the atoms and the molecules within your physical organism don't have the capacity to become aware of Ryan. And just like we, as human energy events, we don't have the capacity to either anticipate, to create, or to image what is happening larger than life. And that again is another thing that I'm suggesting in my um, Facebook group, larger than life group, that there is something happening larger than life, and that we are instruments in the unfolding of that, but we don't have the capacity to create it or to imagine what it's going to be.
so I remember when you would tell me about that, you would say that the cells become the organs, organs become the bodies, the atoms become the cells become the organs become the bodies. But then what is afterlife? And I said, and in my mind, what was afterlife was already there.
Yeah.
So it's not what's afterlife, it's what's beyond life.
Yes.
And I said, and that the way that that's recognized is through the flow.
Yeah.
Somehow.
Yeah. Somehow it's connected, and that may be the closest that we can come to understanding what's happening larger than life. Is to become aware of the flow.
So you said something about image and imagining, but I remember you telling me before something about that images, like imagining. What is images? What is imagining? And there's something about that it's not the highest level. Like imagining, it's kind of like experience based or something. I forget
Yeah,
what was
well,
it.
see, you can't image, or maybe you can, but it seems impossible to image something that you haven't already seen. To imagine, your imaginations are based on your experience. But when you have intuitions or inspirations, which is in the flow, that's not based. That's the reason you can't image it. You can't come up with a mental image of what that is, because it's beyond that. And when you try to articulate your awareness, then you rely upon your currency, your experience-based thinking.
Your vocabulary.
Yeah. Then you build a booth using material from your vocabulary.
Yeah, that's like.
No.
So, what's an example of an inspiration that's beyond experience or imaging? Like,
Well, when you had an awareness of the quadrant model, so you had an awareness, and then you articulated it based on your experience. And now all the research that you've done is using experience to illustrate and demonstrate um, that which came to your awareness, came into your awareness.
so can you give another example from somebody else?
Well, Einstein in his E equals mc squared theory. See, he had an awareness, and then he articulated it mathematically using the currency of mathematics.
So mathematics, isn't that image experience based thinking? Or?
Yes, absolutely. It's secondary.
So he built the booth, but he had an inspiration before that, or
Yeah.
maybe it was his inspiration just the oneness of things and recognizing a relationship that's beyond rational comprehension, but just something that's completely maybe even counterintuitive, but you know, something that's very insightful that it can't just come. It has to come from you already knew it. It came from a higher plane or something.
Yes. Wasn't it he who said, when the questions are simple and the answers are simple too, we hear God thinking?
Okay. That's interesting. So he was looking for the most simple. That was already an intuition that he had. That the most simple. That's what happened with me with the quadrant model. I knew there was something so simple.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know.
That's it.
Anything else with that, Grandma?
No.
So remember you used to talk about snapshots and taking pictures and snapshots and.
Yeah. Well, see, that's a booth. That's capturing it. See, he captured in that mathematical formula E equals mc squared. You captured it in your quadrant, in the cross. You snapped it shut. Now anybody can memorize that, but nobody will benefit from memorizing it.
I benefited from it though because I had an inspiration.
No, you benefited from the inspiration. Then you articulated it in the model.
And somebody can either memorize the model, but they'll never get to the level that I got in coming up with it.
Right, exactly.
How do they get to that level?
Well, they have to research it. Just like Einstein. He had to do all the research, and then he says, perhaps while eating an apple, the answer will come and say, here I am.
And Grandpa, you would talk about that there is no like physical matter, that there is no like that's just all an illusion. It's all empty space. But then also you talk about this idea of navigating. We've evolved to live to navigate within this.
Yes.
So what is that?
Well, that's rather complicated. And again, this is one that came to me, and I've always had a little trouble articulating it. But you can see examples of it, for example, in chemistry. Atoms have a way of communicating. They've developed a capacity. It's not a sensory, it's an electric. They send electric signals back and forth, and that capacity to send electric signals enables them to navigate and negotiate within the world of atoms. Well, on the human level, we have both a sensory apparatus, but we have something beyond the senses, which we've named intuitive and inspired. But when you rely simply on your sensory apparatus, see, if you see the world as a physical reality, then you develop senses, your five senses, in order to navigate and negotiate within that assumed physical world. So your sensory apparati are necessary in order to navigate and negotiate within a world of physical interpersonal, within a physical interpersonal world. But when you begin to see that there are limitations to that mode of living, then you begin to develop something beyond your sensory apparatus. And as you begin to develop your intuitive, and what we call our intuitive and inspired, there may be better words for it, but maybe there aren't better words for it. Then you begin to see no longer that you're navigating within a physical interpersonal world, but you're navigating in the flow, in a transcendent and transpersonal world. I see. I didn't say that real clearly,
So,
but it's very clear to me.
I'm gonna put it on pause and then we'll continue hopefully discussing maybe that idea.
Okay.
So.